seemed easy enough just to talk about fighter races. But it's a bit more difficult. Before we understand what a fighter race is, we really have to, for a foreigners in Australia, what is a fighter race. So, I'll begin. Among the most enduring images of World War I is that of the intrepid fighter race, the brave young pilot who shot down lots of aeroplanes flown by the country's enemies. Indeed, of the millions who served in that war, the German Manfred Richthofen is probably the best known junior officer, or indeed warrior of every rank. A glamorous image of fighter pilots has grasped the public interest. And for reasons that don't quite escape me, that sort of combat is generally seen as very more interesting and a bit more glamorous than that. The Canadians at Passchendaele, just about 95 years ago today. It's been argued with very good reason that airmen engaged in artillery observation, bombing or reconnaissance missions might have done more for their nation's war effort than the fighter races, although the deeds of the latter are much better known. However, by engaging and destroying enemy fighters, the fighter pilots eased the tasks of the other airmen, as well as making it difficult for the enemy's bombers and the other like to perform their functions. Inevitably, some fighter pilots were blessed with more skill and luck than others. These men became the aces. Now, before focusing on the Australian aces, perhaps we should establish just what's meant by an ace pilot. Many dictionaries define an ace as a pilot who has destroyed 5 or more enemy aircraft. However, this definition is more applicable to World War II than to the Great War. As we shall see, an airman in World War I did not have to destroy any aircraft he rated as an ace. And, sorry, I'll put that up. Here we should understand what's meant by an air combat victory at different times during the war. This was not entirely constant. An air combat was considered a victory in the very early stages, may not be so regarded in 1918. And an analogy might be a naval engagement in Napoleonic times. 2 ships from opposing nations meet on the high seas, they fight, one is damaged enough to go back to port. It's not sunk, but it's still a victory for the one who didn't go back to port. In the same spirit, in 1914-15, a victory might be proclaimed if an enemy aeroplane was shot down, fairly obvious, was seen to be driven down while out of control or badly damaged and landed in Allied or enemy territory. So, and there were cases of this happening of an enemy pilot simply deciding he doesn't want to fight anymore and just landed. It's a moral victory rather than a physical one. As the war progressed and aerial fighting became more sophisticated, the criteria became more exacting. For the British air services, the following normally applied. An enemy was destroyed or destroyed in flames while it was seen to crash by enemy independent witnesses, usually other airmen from the same flight, or very often balloon observers or anti-aircraft batteries. Or an enemy was deemed to be out of control and seen by witnesses to dive away from a combat, seemingly damaged or with an incapacitated pilot. Obviously, airmen from both sides feigned damage to leave a combat when they're at a disadvantage, and any would-be victor who followed down a seemingly out of control enemy down to low level was taken at a very great risk of being shot down by ground fire. In World War II, when fighters were equipped with gun cameras, it was much easier to determine if an aeroplane really had been damaged beyond control and was bad damage. Squadrons reported their pilots' claims to the relevant wing headquarters, where they were reviewed and then either confirmed or disallowed. Reviewing of victories was a relatively small activity in the early years of the war, but must have been a very complex business as aerial fighting became more intense in 1918. In 1917-1918, it changed from fights between individual aircraft to fights between very large formations. And this development can be said to have led to the end of the individual high-scoring aces and the appearance of many aces with relatively low victory numbers. Something else that can be confusing about World War I aerial victories is the British policy of crediting a full victory rather than a share to all the airmen involved in the destruction of an enemy machine. So that sometimes several pilots could each be credited with a victory when only one enemy aeroplane was brought down. In the case of 2-seater aircraft, credit could be given to both the pilot and the observer. And this crediting, while it did a lot for squadron morale and pilot's morale, applied only at squadron level. At wing level, they distilled them down to how many aeroplanes had actually been shot down. But this business of crediting everybody who was involved in the fight with a full victory, I think an analogy may well be an Olympic relay event, where everyone gets a gold medal, although only one event was actually won. Obviously, in the heat of combat, things can get very confusing, and both sides tend to overclaim, and it's very hard to now attribute losses and victories, especially so many German records were destroyed in the Second World War. France was the first belligerent country to use the term ace to successfully describe a pilot, and Roland Garros, sorry, I'll talk about a sequence there. The first ace, Roland Garros, name perpetuated in the French tennis stadium. He was the first man to fly across the Mediterranean in about 1912, and 3 victories before he was brought down. Garros, as you probably know, didn't have a synchronised machine gun. He had deflector plates on the propeller of his moraine, and the idea was that a bullet would hit the deflector plate, go up and harmlessly, but he was brought down by engine trouble. The first real ace, the first man to shoot down to be credited with 5 victories, was another Frenchman, Adolphe Peugeot. 6 victories before his death in August 1915, when he was actually shot down by a German who he had taught to fly before the war. It's pretty immoral in that some way. The French army officially identified aces as such in communiques, and the term was adopted by the United States Air Service when American flyers entered into combat in 1918. Something that varied very much between the belligerent powers was how they treated aces. In France and Germany, they were idolised and treated right like pop stars of the first day. And we've got people, Georges Guinemer, he was credited with 53 victories, and the legend grew that he flew so high he couldn't come down. But the reality was he just ran into an enemy aeroplane. But there was quite a wave of public sadness and disquiet when these heroes were killed, as he was. On the other side of the lines, got Maxim Morgan, 16 victories before he was killed in an accident, and Oswald Volker, 40 victories before killed in an accident. Volker killed in October 1916, so to amass 40 victories by then is quite incredible. The British Empire saw things differently. They had a very different approach, and there was a definite policy to keep the names of successful pilots out of the headlines. It was felt that publicity given to particular members of the air services was unfair to the remainder, who were carrying out work that might be said to be just as vital, if not more vital, to the war effort. And in the British public school sporting system philosophy of the time, they felt that publicising fighter pilots in the RFC would be rather like publicising a wing three-quarter who scored a try in a rugby match, but ignoring the men inside them who made the opportunity. Nevertheless, the names of successful pilots became known, especially inside the services, because of the weekly RAAF communiques, which are summaries of air activity, and they listed air combat victories. Although from May 1918, our controls were no longer listed because they were just too many of them. But naturally, the normally competitive spirit inherent in young men led to intra-unit comparisons. And there was keen interest in how many victories were attributed to particular airmen and units. The first British ace to be known to the general public was the teenage prodigy Albert Hall, who was credited with 14 victories, awarded the Victoria Cross, was on the very verge of a nervous breakdown, and was killed in action all before his 20th birthday. The other one, whose name was first became known, was Captain Philip Fullard, who's pretty much unknown today, but he amassed 40 victories flying Newport Scouts before a football injury, playing soccer, moral in that. And that ended his fighting career in 1917, and the leg didn't recover and he didn't return to combat. But again, 40 victories in Newports is quite something. The next ace who became known was Major James McCartney, who was so well known he was actually encouraged to write a book about his experiences. The penny had finally dropped. There was considerable interest, and it did a lot to service and civilian morale to know about successful pilots. So McCartney wrote his book, and later the rather controversial Canadian Billy Bishop also wrote a book. And so aces were known. And it's interesting to note, just digressing a little bit here, of the 79 British Empire pilots who were credited with more than 20 victories, 8 were Australians, 38 were British, that's English, Scottish or Welsh, 21 were Canadians, 4 were Irish, 2 were New Zealanders and 6 were South Africans. However, the term ace was not in common use during the war. Indeed, if you go through the flight magazine for the war, which is online and you can search it, it uses the term ace about 3 times, and that to explain to the readers just what the French meant when they talk about someone being an ace. However, by mid-1919, the use of the word ace had spread, and Australian newspapers were using the term when describing the return of AFC men to their homeland. In particular, Captain Cobby was described as the Australian ace. Interest in the aces, another World War I airman, rather dwindled after the armistice, but was revived in the 1930s thanks to the efforts of authors like Captain W. Johns, Great Eagles, which is where I came in, and the US-based magazine writers who glorified the efforts of the combatant airmen. Interest lagged again after World War II, but has been revived in the past 2 decades. There are many books being published documenting the deaths of aces from all combatant nations. Australia certainly produced its share of fighter aces from the men who served in the Australian Flying Corps and the British RAAF, RNAS and RAAF. Their AFC aces include over France and Flanders with the British, and over Australian aces flew with over the British over Western Italy and France. In the course of the address, we'll look at Australian airmen who reached ace status. I won't read out all the names of the 69 or 66 or 69, depending on which source you use, but I've produced a table which will go into papers later. And I've covered observers as well. Some lists don't do the observers. Right, well, I've covered rather than go through all of them, I covered the best known Australian aces. The first one being Harry Cobby, born in 1894, a bank clerk from Melbourne, where he joined the AFC in December 1916. After flying training, he joined the No. 4 Squadron AFC in France, February 1918. Flying up with Camels, he began down in enemy aircraft during the Kaiserschlacht offensive. Camel, in case it's not familiar with one. In March 1918, when, like all Camel pilots, he spent much time engaged in ground attack activities against the advancing German army. He was noted as being a particularly aggressive airman, and he continued to amass victories until he transferred to the United Kingdom as an instructor in September, by which time he was credited with victories over 19 German fighters, 5 two-seaters and 5 balloons. He remained in the RAAF after the war, rose to wing command before joining Civil Aviation Board in 1936. During World War II, he returned to the RAAF and became an Air Commodore commanding units in Western Australia. It's a photograph of him. He's training Camel in England, and there he is standing in front of an Aero 504, one of which we saw behind us there. He was awarded the George Medal for rescuing passengers from a crashed Catalina in September 1943. He commanded the 1st Tactical Air Force before leaving the service in 1946 to become Regional Director of New South Wales of the Department of Civil Aviation. He died in November 1955. I extracted the citations for the medals of all the aces we talk about. This is a fairly onerous task going through the London Gazette to find them, and then discovering, just as I'd finished, that they're already online on the Aerodrome website. Life, isn't it? Next one. Australia's ace of aces, Captain Robert Alexander Little, DSO RAAC. Born in Melbourne 1895, joined the RNAS in 1915 and trained as a pilot at Hendon. In June 1916, he was posted to France where he flew some 1.5 Strutters on bombing missions. His career as a fighter pilot began in October 1916 when he joined No. 8 Squadron, where he was credited with 3 victories while flying Sopwith Pups. He'd always be associated with the Sopwith triplane, as he claimed 24 victories while flying the type between April and July 1917. In fact, he was the second most successful triplane pilot, beaten only by Canadian Raymond Collishaw. He then flew Sopwith Camels and added another 10 victories to his tally by the end of July. In April 1918, after the formation of the RAAF, he had been posted to another Camel unit, No. 203 Squadron, as a flight commander, and he added another 8 victories by 22 May. 5 days later, he flew a Camel on a night fighting mission against the German bomber, and during this flight he was very unlucky. A bullet passed through both thighs, severing arteries, and he bled to death after a forced landing. It was unfortunate. Our next dates, the three famous ones. Major Roderick Stanley Dallas, DSE and Bar. Born outstanding in Queensland and commissioned in the regular army in 1913. He was unable to transfer to the RAAF as he requested, so he joined the RAAF. After pilot training, he was posted to the Western Front, where he gained 3 victories while flying U-boats before training another 2 victories while flying the prototypes up with triplane. He went on to be credited with 16 victories flying triplanes, and he became the sixth most successful triplane ace. 3 victories then gained from Camels. When the RAAF was amalgamated with the RAF in April 1918, he was promoted to Major and sent to Command No. 40 Squad flying the SE-5A, where he was credited with a further 9 victories. And that's his SE-5A in a repainting scheme he devised to camouflage the aircraft. And the RAF being what it was, he was probably told to get it back to the way it should be. He was credited with 39 victories, bringing his total to 32, 14 two-seaters, 1 seaplane and 17 fighters, before he was killed in action in June 1918. Lieutenant Johann Werner Youngster, 14, was credited with victory, the 6th of his eventual 7. Now, they're the 3 leading aces. What I thought we'd do is now, I picked 6, representative 6, not so well-known aces. And the first of them is Captain Thomas Baker from Smithfield, South Australia, born in 1897. He worked as a bank clerk before joining the 16th Field Artillery Battery in July 1915. In December 1916, he was awarded the Military Medal, without a citation, for repairing broken telephone lines in 30 places while under heavy fire at Wintercourt. He was awarded a bar to the Airmen for his action at the scene in 21 June 1917, again no citation, where he played a part in extinguishing a fire in the camouflage netting over the battery's guns while under heavy shell fire. He transferred to the AFC in September 1917, was commissioned in March 1918 after pilot training. In June 1918, he joined No. 4 Squadron on the Western Front, and he was credited with 6 victories, 3 fighters, 2 two-seaters and a kite relief while flying us up with Camel. In October, the squadron re-equipped us up at Snipe, and he went on to do with another 6 victories, all Fokker D7 fighters, while flying the new machine as a flight commander. He was killed in action on 4 November 1918 when flying at Snipe. This is one of the AFC's last combat casualties. Patrol from No. 4 Squadron was involved in a flight with a large number of Fokker D7s from Youngest Striker 3, and 3 snipes were shot down. 2 of them were claimed by Rittmeister Karl Boller, the commander of the Astorbilka. They were Boller's 35th and 36th victories of the war, and his last. Boller went on to serve in the Luftwaffe in the Second War. The next man, Lieutenant John Robert Gordon, is an observer race. I mentioned that observers were given full credit for any aircraft shot down by the pilot or the observer. He was born in Hilton, South Australia in 1895, the son of a politician. Joined the 10th Battalion AIF in August 1914, served at Gallipoli, and he was commissioned in August 1915. After about a typhoid, he was returned to Australia and imported out to the AIF in May 1916. After home service as recruiting officer in the militia, he joined the AFC in May 1917 and was sent to the UK for pilot training, which he did not complete. He then became an observer and was posted to No. 62 Squadron RFC in France, flying Bristol fighters. And his pilot was the redoubtable Captain William Staten at MCDFC, who was credited with 26 victories. The pair of Staten and Gordon went on to be credited with 15 victories, 8 fighters, 4 two-seaters and 3 unidentified aircraft, as well as taking part in numerous attacks on enemy ground forces. Gordon was awarded the Military Cross in June 1918, at which time he transferred back to the UK for pilot training, which he completed just before the armistice. Got a photo of him there practicing with the Lewis gun. He transferred back to the AFC in October, but did not take part in further operations. He remained in the RAAF for a time after the war, but then ran buffalo hunting tours of the Northern Territory, and later worked for the Banakim Oil Company before rejoining the RAAF in World War II and serving as a wing commander. He died in December 1978 and was able to claim that he served in 5 air services: the AFC, the RFC, the RAF, the RAAF and the RCAF. I haven't found anything about his Canadian service, but he was there. An ace who served only with the British services, British Air Services, was Captain Cedric Howell, Spike Howell. Born in Melbourne, 1896, he joined the AIF in January 1916, and he served as a sniper on the Western Front before transferring to the RFC, one of 200 AIF men who did so in March 1917. After training, he was posted number 45 Squadron, then flying support Camels in France, but he wasn't credited with any victories until they moved to the Italian front as part of the Italian Allied aid to Italy after the Austro-German offensive at Caporetto in October 1917. Spike served as number 45 Squadron in Italy. He soon began to amass victories, first over a German Albatross, followed by 19 Austro-Hungarian or German fighters. And interesting, he's one of the few aces who all his victories were against fighters. And I should stress too that by saying Austro-Hungarian, that's they were as good as the Germans. The Austro-Hungarian Albatross D3 with its 185 horsepower engine was a very good machine. It was a better machine than the German Albatross. He was credited with 20 victories in total before mid-July, and he was transferred to the UK as an instructor. After the armistice, he left the RAF, and together with a Sergeant Fraser, an AFC man from Bendigo, he entered as the contest sponsored by the Australian government to be the first to fly from England to Australia using a Mountainside A Mark 1. This is an aeroplane designed for the England-Australia flights. It's really an expanded version of the Mountainside Buzzard, the fighter that was going to replace the SE-5A in 1919. But it was made into a 2-seater, and for the purposes of this flight, it was a land plane, but they were going to fly it as far as Calcutta as a land plane and then convert it to a float plane for the rest of the flight. The Mountainside left Hounslow for Lyon on 4 December 1919, with a defective fuel pump forced to landing at Dijon, where the tailskid snapped on landing. They next landed at Pisa, and they were forced to divert to Toulon for terrible weather. After on-the-spot improvisation and carpentry, they left for Taranto, but they couldn't get any further than Salerno. On 9 December, they left Salerno for Athens, journey that should have taken about 4 hours. However, nothing was seen of the machine until repeatedly at Corfu, an island in the Mediterranean, and a storm some 8 hours after takeoff. In all probability, we'll never know why they were so far off course. There is a theory that Howell's wife was actually travelling on the Orsova, going out to Australia, and he may have been looking for a ship in the Mediterranean to do a low passover. We'll never know. But there's close up with him and Sergeant Fraser. The Mountainside came down in the sea off Corfu, and cries were heard by people on the land. Unfortunately, the conditions were too rough to permit a boat to be launched into the seas abated. Captain Howell's body was washed ashore, but Sergeant Fraser's body was never found. There's an intriguing item in Flight magazine in January 1920. It says that Captain Howell's father was conversing with a naval officer in Melbourne on the evening of 10 December when a disused clock in the room suddenly ticked in Morse code and then fell silent. Mr. Howell was alarmed and immediately took this as a premonition of some awful happening to his son. Unfortunately, this proved only too real. The Howell family claimed that he managed to land the aircraft somewhere on Corfu and had then been murdered before the Mountainside and its crew's bodies were pushed into the water. His father called for further inquiry, but there was no avail. The mystery remains. It's interesting, when the British consul's report of the accident, he says that the Italian authorities were quite energetic in searching for the wreckage of the aeroplane until they discovered it wasn't Italian, and then they lost interest. So in April 1920, Captain Howell was given a military funeral in Melbourne. Next one, Captain Ted Kenny. That is christened Patrick Edward Kennedy, but he preferred Ted. Born in Trafalgar, Victoria in 1888. So he's a bit older than most First War fighter pilots. He was working as an accountant when he enlisted in the 1st Light Horse, July 1915. After service in Palestine, he transferred to the AFC's in February 1917 and trained as a pilot. He crashed an RE-8, and the only photograph I can find of him, War Memorial site, with an aeroplane. He crashed his RAAF in landing at night in December 1917. On the spring of 1918, he was flying the Bristol F2B, a very redoubtable aeroplane, and on 28th April, another F2B pilot, Captain E.C. Stook, and their observers, Captain Hawley and Fletcher, forced 3 German fighters to land and machine gunned them on the ground. On 3 August, with Lieutenant L.W. Sutherland, who wrote Aces and Kings, as his observer, he forced a German 2-seater to land and shot down 2 others. In late September, with 2 other pilots, he was detached from the squadron to operate in the Aero area. And on 23 September, he attacked an enemy airfield with bombs, destroying several aircraft on the ground, and then shot down the 2-seater. His victory total was 7, 1 fighter and 6 2-seaters. He was one of the many he suffered the influenza pandemic of 1919, but survived. He returned to Australia in March 1919, joined the RAAF on its formation in 1921, served to the 1930s. After leaving the Air Force, he went to Queensland, where he worked as a secretary and later a commission agent. 2 daughters served in the RAAF in World War II. He died in 1975. Next one is Captain Roy Phillips. Born in North Sydney, but moved to Western Australia at a young age and was an accountant in Perth when he joined the RAAF in 1915. Served as a captain on the Western Front and was wounded in the leg during the First Australian Trench Raid, then flew away from the front with the leg that remained partly paralysed. Transferred to the AFC and was posted to number 68 Australian Squadron as the adjutant, but then trained as a pilot. After gaining his wings, he was sent to number 32 Squadron RFC in France to gain experience on the DH-5. Aeroplane that's been discussed earlier, as this was the aeroplane that would eventually equip his parent unit. He was shot down by flak near Ypres, but emerged unharmed and rejoined number 68 Squadron in September as a flight commander. His first victory was a 2-seater over Cambrai, and he began to amass victories in March 1918 after his unit was equipped with the SE-5A. He was credited with a further 14 victories, including 4 in one day on 12 June, including the Fokker D-7 flown by the 11th Victory German ace, Lieutenant Fritz Verser, another of the 44 Victory ace, Bruno Verser, who was captain. In August, he was transferred to Major and posted to the UK to command number 6 Training Squadron at Minchinhampton. His 15 victories included 3 2-seaters and 12 fighters. He farmed in New South Wales and Queensland between the wars, then he joined the RAAF to command number 2 Elementary Flying Training School at Archerfield, and sadly he was killed in a flying accident in May 1940. The last one, Ethan Taplin, which is her name, was born in Adelaide 1895, working as engineer in Sydney when he joined the RAAF in 1915. In 1917 he transferred to the AFC, and after training as a pilot he joined number 67 Squadron in Palestine. He was flying a B-2A on a photographic mission in January 1918 when he was attacked by a German Albatross fighter and managed to force the enemy aircraft to land. He was posted to number 4 Squadron in France in July 1918 and is credited with 10 victories, 3 2-seaters, 4 fighters and 3 kite balloons. He had a very lucky escape on 26 July when his engine failed when he was taking off with a load of bombs. He cut the engine and unfastened his seatbelt. The bombs exploded when the camel hit the ground. He was thrown clear and uninjured. Buckle up and stay safe. His combat career came to an end on 5 September when, after bringing down an observation balloon, his patrol met a large formation of Fokker D-7s. Taplin sent down 1 Fokker actual control. He claimed this victory and the balloon after the armistice, bringing his victory total to 12, and damaged another before being wounded and forced to land behind German lines, where he became a prisoner of war. Credit for downing him was given to Vice Admiral Christian Mesch of Yasta 26, with the 9th of his 13 victories. Taplin was awarded the DFC in the June 1919 King's Birthday Honours List, but there was no citation. After repatriation, Ethan Taplin flew Australia's first scheduled airline service for Norman Greeley's West Australian Airways and pioneered much of WA's aerial activity before settling in Port Hedland, where he served the community as a butcher, undertaker and electricity supplier. It's a varied career. He stood for the WA Parliament as an independent candidate for the seat of Pilbara in the 1947 election, but was not elected. He died in July 1961. So that's just a snapshot, just around five of the more obscure at random. When you get the papers, you'll see the table of ACEs. The first one is the sort of officially recognised figures in alphabetical order. Then there are an order of the victory tallies. And the third table, I've taken out the out-of-control victories, which in later conflicts they would be termed possibles or probables. And there seems a tendency now to winnow down the tallies down to definite victories. So we went from 66 aces, we come down to 45. But I hope you find it interesting reading.
Call for questions?
Thanks, Gareth. That's great. Neil Smith. I've always been confused about the status of a balloon as far as mace is concerned. Can you comment on that? Because only two of those chaps, if I'm right, were mentioned as being killers of balloons. Does a balloon count or not?
A balloon certainly counts as a victory. But yeah, the balloons were well defended and they tended to attract specialist balloon busters. There were some pilots who were prepared to go after them, some weren't. Actually, just digressing a little, balloon observers had parachutes and would jump. And there were two theories amongst pilots. One was that when the observer jumped, he was no longer a fit target. The other school of thought was you should go after him because all he needs is another balloon to be back up and he's back in action and spotting the guns killed. I don't think too many balloon observers subscribe to the second theory. Yeah, well, balloons certainly count as a standard victory.
Manned or not?
No, they're not barrage balloons. Barrage balloons were not terribly common in the First War. They were over London. They had balloons together, the cable between them, and vertical cable between them, to try and catch low-flying, of course, ghost bombs to fly higher. But on the western front, there were observation balloons with a little basket underneath.
Down the back, no?
Thanks, Gareth, for a very interesting paper on an issue, as you say, is dominates the literature entirely and probably needs to be treated more critically. Just wondering, in the absence of, from what you were saying, it sounds like there was a bit of an absence of any set in stone official policy for crediting victories. Do you think there was a difference between wings and brigades and that personality might have come into it? You know, some wing commanders might have been a bit more liberal with their allowing planes than others and so on?
Yeah, I think that must have been the case. And as an example of this, I can only think of Bishop's BC. We're probably all familiar with the story of in June 1917, Bishop took off in his Newport, came back and announced that he shot up a German aerodrome, shot down 4 German aircraft and tried to take off, and he was awarded the BC. About the only time the BC has been awarded with no cooperation. And this was rushed through by his commanding officer, Major Scott of 60 Squadron, and went to Wing, who approved it, and right up the line, and the BC was duly awarded. The tricky part is, of course, after the armistice, when they started looking at German records, and the Germans didn't seem to know anything about this. And indeed, designating the man is not getting better. A lot of work has recently been done on trying to correlate claims against German losses. And for most of the cases, and certainly there I recovered, nearly all of them can be documented. But in the case of Bishop, I think one of the 17 victories can be casually documented. So yes, certainly at the wing level, and there must be, because in mitigation of that, the time Bishop was awarded the VC, I think there was a definite need for a VC for the RAAF. They'd just come through bloody April, the horrendous casualties of April 1917, and I think there was a thought that they needed a VC to pick up morale, and so indeed it looked good, like they did.
Gareth, thank you very much for the brilliant paper. In my paper I made mention of this
Australian pilot who the Germans were able to get a little bit of information from. It appeared in September 1918, about the time that Len Taplin had actually been taken prisoner by the Germans. What's interesting is that once Allied prisoners made their way back to London, they were interviewed by RAAF admin headquarters, and almost all of them mentioned the process of interrogation slightly tackled. So it may have actually been a bit of a sore point.
Well, these are would-be politicians.
No, time for one more, sorry.
Mike Robertson. Gary, did the tally of any of the aces include shooting down Zeppelin?
No. No, I'm pretty sure no. Zeppelins, they were shot down by home defence pilots in Britain. And now Danny mentioned I've got a very vague feeling there was one who took part in the destruction, but no Australian, so.
Thank you very much, Gareth. Well, from daring do of almost 100 years ago, we're going to move to daring do of the current period with Flight Lieutenant Mark or Darcy O'Connor as our next speaker. Darcy, sorry, people coming and going. Darcy joined the RAAF in 1970 on completion of engine mechanic training. Reminded me of those First World War mechanics. Becoming pilots, Darcy, at the RAAF School of Technical Training at Wagga Wagga, New South Wales. He worked on Sabre, Vampire, Macchi and later Mirage aircraft. He was selected for pilot training in 1976 and trained on CT-4 aircraft at No. 1 Flying Training School, right here at Point and Macchi aircraft at No. 2 Flying School in Pierce, Western Australia, before graduating in June 1977. After conversion into C-47 Dakota aircraft, and they were still flying them, at Central Flying School at East Sale, Darcy was posted to the RAAF's transport support flight at RAAF Base Butterworth, Malaysia. In 1980, Darcy was posted to No. 9 Squadron Amberley, Queensland to fly these things, UH-1H Iroquois helicopters, where he completed peacekeeping duties in the Sinai, flying UH-1H helicopters with the Māori National Force and observers. A flying instructor at No. 1 Flying School in 1984, and then in 1988, Central Flying School at East Sale for instructional duties before retirement in 1990. I think you'd agree that's a fairly interesting career. However, Darcy went on to fly for various domestic and international airlines, some of which are still flying, and some of which are not. I think of Ansett in particular. And qualified and flew, of course, on Airbus A320s, Lear 45s, Boeing 747-400s, Airbus A320s, and currently is still flying A330s. He remains active. Now, his extensive background in flying, ex-military and historic aircraft for the RAAF Museum began in 1984 and include the Sopwith Pup, the Fokker triplane, the Tiger Moth, the Chipmunk, CTA, Windgill, Harvard and Mustang. Therefore, apart from those who flew them all those years ago, who better than to provide a pilot's view of the Sopwith Pup and Fokker triplane, if it's not Flight Lieutenant Darcy O'Connor.
Thanks, Andrew. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's indeed an honour to be here among some of our leading writers and historians on the subject of air warfare in World War I. I've been asked to provide a view on the flying of a couple of those machines of that era. And contrary to what you may have heard from certain museum staff, I was not a test pilot on these aircraft during that period. I have been able to confirm this, the director confirmed that he did not see me on the Western Front when he was there. I'll give you an overview of the handling characteristics of the Sopwith Pup and the Fokker triplane in the absence of any of those who flew them in action, so I'm the next best option. The Pup, as it was originally commonly called, was a British single-seater biplane fighter built by the Sopwith Aviation Company. It entered service with the Royal Flying Corps, the RFC, and the Royal Naval Service in the autumn of 1916. Its very good flying characteristics and manoeuvrability made it a very successful aircraft. However, the Pup was eventually outclassed by the newer German fighters and eventually, by the end of 1917, was replaced. It should be noticed there that it was less than a year. So the advancement of the aircraft industry and the fighter capabilities of those days was very, very fluid. The Pup was heavily influenced in the design by an aircraft that was built for Harry Hawker, the company's test pilot. The resulting aircraft featured fabric-covered wooden framework and staggered equal span wings with ailerons on both wings. Most Pups were powered by an 80 horsepower Larone rotary engine, and its armament was a single 303 Vickers machine gun that was synchronised to fly through the propeller. Earlier presenter there talked about Roland Gareth, how they initially just fired and hoped that the metal on the back of the propeller deflected the ones that didn't make it through. By the end of 1917, most of the Pups on the Western Front had been replaced by Sopwith triplanes and then Sopwith Camel. Aircraft were then deployed to home defence duties, and there they were re-engined with the 100 horsepower Gnome engine that provided an improved rate of climb. The Pup saw extensive service as a trainer, including fighting school units for instruction in combat techniques. The aircraft was also used as pioneering aircraft carrier experiments. The Australian Flying Corps equipped 3 training squadrons in the United Kingdom with Pups. They were numbers 5 and 6 squadrons at Minchinhampton and number 8 squadron at Leatherton. The RAAF Museum's Pup is finished in the colours of number 8 squadron AFC, and that is the aircraft that we took as the design for our paint scheme on our museum Pup. As well as operating Pups in the United Kingdom, the AFC operated Pups at Central Flying School here at Point Cook. And after the formation of the Royal Australian Air Force in March of 1921, Number 1 Flying Training School continued to operate Pups at Point Cook until 1925. The general characteristics of the aircraft: it had a length of 19 feet 3 3/4 inches, 5.89 metres, a wingspan of 26 feet 6 inches, an empty weight of 358 kilograms, and a fully loaded weight, which fuel, ammunition and pilot, of 557 kilograms. This gave the aircraft a maximum speed of 97 knots, or about 180 kilometres per hour at sea level. The service ceiling was 17,500 feet. I'll talk more about that ceiling later. Had an endurance of 3 hours, and the total number that were manufactured was 1,770. The Fokker triplane, or dry-decker triplane, was a World War I fighter which saw widespread service in the spring of 1918. It became renowned as the aircraft in which the famous Red Baron, Manfred von Richthofen, gained his last 19 victories, and in which he was killed on the 21st of April 1918. I might add that with the number of parts that are in collections around the world, which have been reputed to have come from his crashed aircraft, we could almost reconstruct a squadron of triplanes. However, the museum here at Point Cook does have artefacts from his actual aircraft. In February 1917, the Sopwith triplane began to appear over the Western Front and proved superior to the Albatross fighters in use. We'll just have a look at a short video now of the triplane and one von Richthofen. I mentioned the altitude to which these aircraft were flying to. Have a look at what he puts on. He's got his uniform. An oversuit. But before he puts that on, he puts another jacket on. Example of the rotary engine. In fact, the whole cylinders all rotated around the crankshaft, not the crankshaft around the rest of the engine. And they're actually lubricating the valve system there. One would get the idea that it may be a bit cold at those altitudes. Briefing before they set off. That's another salute.
Hey, Darcy, that briefing's about as good as you did today, too, isn't it?
The thing to note there is how close the gun butts are to the pilot's face, and I'll speak about that later. They go in search of boat. Here they are inspecting a downed aircraft. Quite a lot of interest has been taken there in the engine, because the engine development at that time was again exponential in the advancement that was happening. A captured English pilot. All smiles. So as the albatrosses were being beaten in the sky, Fokker responded by converting an unfinished biplane prototype into a small rotary-powered triplane with steel tube fuselage and thick cantilever wings. This was refined with more nuanced ailerons and elevators. Also added were wingtip skids, as the aircraft was tricky to land and prone to ground looping, and that was proved here at Point Cook on several times. Compared to other fighters available, the DR-1 offered exceptional manoeuvrability, though the ailerons were not effective. The rudder and elevators were light and very powerful. The triplane's marked directional instability afforded rapid turns. This manoeuvrability was negated by its lack of speed in level flight and in a dive. Other deficiencies were poor forward vision during takeoff and landing, and the proximity to the gun butts to the pilot's face. So in an accident, the face went forward into the gun butts, and a lot of the pilots were suffering horrendous damage to their face, and in fact some of the injuries were fatal. However, the greatest deficiency was the wing failures that were being experienced by the pilots. Could ruin your day. The subsequent investigation revealed the wings had been poorly constructed, such that insufficient curing time of the glue was allowed, and the lack of waterproofing allowed moisture to enter the timber. Fokker subsequently strengthened the rigid structure and improved production quality control, particularly varnishing the wings and the ribs. Post-war research also revealed that the upper wing had significantly higher wing loading than the lower wings. Some general characteristics about the aircraft: it was a length of 18 foot 11 inches, a wingspan of 23 feet 7 inches, an empty weight of 406 kilograms with a loaded weight of 586. Its max speed 100 knots, or about 185 kilometres per hour at sea level. It had a service ceiling of 20,000 feet, and it was powered by a 110 horsepower 9-cylinder rotary. There were only 320 of them made. The altitudes at which these pilots operated is very interesting in that they climbed well above what is now recognised as the maximum level to fly without oxygen, and that's 10,000 feet. So they were obviously feeling effects of hypoxia along with the cold, plus also they had to combat the influence of castor oil that was used as a lubricant in those days coming back across their face. So the conditions that they flew in are, to me, unimaginable, but they did, and they did for a long time. That brings us now to the aircraft we had at the Royal Australian Air Force Museum. First off, the pilot selection. Initially, RAAF pilots had tailwheel aircraft experience through the Winchell and Dakota aircraft, so therefore transition to museum aircraft that we were flying at the time here was not a problem. Subsequently, with the withdrawal of these aircraft from the RAAF, there were no RAAF pilots with tailwheel experience and very little piston engine handling experience, as most of the aircraft then became jet powered. And in fact, the RAAF Museum is the only ADF unit that requires the use of avgas, which the Army, who are suppliers, can't get their head around a little bit sometimes. All RAAF pilots have the aptitude to fly aeroplanes. The museum requires that the pilots have the correct attitude towards operating these aircraft. No longer is the matter of being given a Commonwealth car to drive around the skies. They have to fly conservatively, looking for the aircraft longevity. We initially endorsed the pilots on the Tiger Moth. After gaining experience, they then transitioned to other museum aircraft such as the Pup and the triplane. In the Pup and the triplane, as there is only one seat, first flight equals first solo. The Tiger was used as a lead-in aircraft, and it was good because it had a tail skid. Whilst our triplane and Pup have tail wheels, it taught a lot of ground handling skills. The Sopwith Pup replica that we operate was built by Transavia in 1978 in Sydney. It was one of 2 aircraft that were built and was used by Neil Cotty. The aircraft was purchased by John Pettit from Neil and subsequently acquired by the Royal Australian Air Force Museum. Powered by an Armstrong Siddeley Janet 7-cylinder radial producing 120 horsepower. And just some comparisons that we do have with the weights of the aircraft. The original Pup, 358 kilos, our Pup, 498 kilos. Maximum weight, the original 557 kilos, our Pup 674 kilos. So you can see, whilst the aircraft were replicated, the weight of the aircraft increased significantly. The triplane is a Redfern-built triplane built in the USA about 1972. It featured in the movie The Great Waldo Pepper. An American airline pilot who was based here in Australia purchased the aircraft. It was eventually obtained by Neil Cotty for use at Barrow for his flying circus. The Australian War Memorial obtained the aircraft as a tax incentive donation. There's another example of how close the pilot's head is to those gun butts. So it was one of the concerns you had when you were flying the aircraft if it did have an engine failure and you had to put it into a paddock somewhere, of what the results were. I don't know where I was going to put my head. just tighten the seatbelts a bit further, I think. The difficulty in taxiing, and I think that's a pretty good photo there, and that you can't see the pilot. So if you can't see the pilot and you're standing just in front of the aircraft, he can't see you. So a very short body. You can see there the broomsticks that we put on the wingtip, so that when the aircraft actually did ground loop and tip, because of the very narrow undercarriage and the short coupling between the tail wheel and the main wheel, it was very prone to ground looping. So not only did the aircraft have a very short fuselage, which gave us ground looping, it was difficult to see ahead. But in the days of when they introduced these aeroplanes, all they did was they pulled them out of the canvas tents or hangars, they faced them in the wing, started and took off. Unfortunately here at Point Cook we have modern runways now and rules and regulations that require us to taxiways and take off on runways. We do allow some dispensation here at Point Cook. Taking off on the triplane, you can see there that the rudder is quite deflected. Because of the torque of the engine and the shortness of the length of the aircraft, it was quite prone to torque effect and also crosswind effect. So you're very cautious on the use of the rudder, unlike the pup, which was quite gentle in fact, in that you could just take off quite easily with a little bit of crosswind and you didn't have to be as brutal on the rudder as you did with the triplane. One of the most challenging aircraft I've ever landed was a triplane. Just go back a bit. You see it on the ground there, that's the landing attitude. So what happens as you down finals, you can see over the front, that's okay. But when you get near the ground and you flare the aircraft to land, several things happen. This set of Venetian blinds that are above you, 3 wings, they close. You can't see forward. They also have the effect of then masking both the rudder and the elevator. So no longer do you have any control over the aircraft on the ground, you also have lost the ability to flare the aeroplane again. So the height judgment had to be nearly impeccable. And it was quite daunting, the first solo I did on that aeroplane, in that I had to land it and I went, here it goes. The people before me had said, oh, land at 70 knots, and that was the wheel altitude, where you could get away, you still had the wings, you could still see, but then as you lowered the tailplane, it all happened again. Venetian blinds came down, you lost sight, you didn't know where you were going, and you lost directional control. And the brakes on this aircraft were marginally effective. So a change of policy at the Australian War Memorial saw the aircraft loaned to the RAAF Museum. After extensive flying up until 1998, we then overhauled the aeroplane, and the director was quite good at that, using his skills from a previous life. We restored it, and in 1989 we reflew it, and then flew it until the year 2000. It was then returned to the Australian War Memorial and subsequently donated for static display at the Museum of Army Flying at Oakey, Queensland. It was powered by a W670 Continental radial, and you notice that we used radials both in the pub and the triplane. Radial and rotary engines like hen's teeth to try and obtain. Those that are around and operating, we try to preserve them so we don't put them in aeroplanes. Of course, if anything happens, we've then lost a very valuable asset. Unfortunately, we don't have the weights of the aircraft that we operated, the Redfern triplane, but I can assure you it was significantly heavier than the original triplane. And 18 years ago, yesterday, Wing Commander Lynn Matthews in the pub, myself in the triplane, formated on the Vimy when it visited here, Point Cook, as part of its round-the-world flight that it was replicated. That's the end of my presentation. I'll take questions from the floor.
airplane than all the others?
As a handling aeroplane, the Pup was the better aircraft to fly. But I think the triplane was a better fighter, especially because of its directional instability. You notice that the rudder on the triplane commences there, so we have a hinge line, and the rudder turns the directional control of the aircraft from there. The triplane had a full turning rudder, so it could turn incredibly quickly, sometimes even without you doing anything. And that's where it got its directional instability. Turns to the right were great. They just turned like anything because you were going with the torque of the engine. You had to work a bit harder to make it turn the other direction. So when we, especially Lynn Matthews and myself, did the display, where I always shot down the Pup because it was the only aircraft with a smoke system. We made sure that all the turns that I had to do whilst fighting were always to the right, so it made it a lot easier. We never flew the aircraft, obviously, to the extent that it was flown and operated during the war, and that's for good reason. One, I didn't really like the glue in the wings, and two, we want to preserve them. But I would imagine that in those days, and especially in the early days of air combat, the pilots didn't really know much about avoidance or how to take advantage. Obviously it was there if you had the height, that was one of the best ones, but after that they were all fairly level as far as manoeuvrability. And that's why a lot of the victories I think you saw before were against two-seater aeroplanes, large aircraft that couldn't manoeuvre as well as a fighter. And fighter to fighter, I'm not too sure how they go.
Yeah, thanks, Darcy. Steve Campbell, right. You just spoke then about the gyroscopic precession or torque effect of the prop, but that's in an aircraft with a radial engine. In these aircraft with their original rotary engines, with all that metal spinning, that effect would have been much more severe, I assume. Can you comment on whether the original flying days of this would have been much more difficult than your replicas as a result?
Having spoken to the RAAF Museum pilots that brought out a couple of years ago to the air show at Avalon a real triplane that had a real rotary, yes, it was much more noticeable the amount of torque and gyroscopic effect that this aircraft had. So therefore, if you knew the direction of rotation of the engine and which way the aircraft was going to turn the best, if you could keep it in your mind, if you were the person doing the chasing, you knew which way they were going to turn. So you had that extra little bit on them straight away. Yeah. And then my former CO in front of me mentioned about that effect. You tried to force them to turn in the unadvantaged direction, so that way they were less manoeuvrable. A little bit like retreating blade stall on an Aerocorp, isn't it?
The same effect occurred in the Second World War between the Spitfire and the ME-109. The 109 turned better to the right and the left. As soon as the Spitfire and Hurricane pilots worked that out, then you always fainted, so that you got him to start turning the wrong way. And that way you got a nice easy trip. And in those early days, it was really a tail chase, because a lot of them didn't know what you could do with a wing. And then as they got closer and closer to the end of the war, they got smarter and smarter. Mike became really interesting.
I'm not too sure whether the knowledge of lead and lag with the shooting was available then either at the time, where obviously the aircraft is in, say, in a turn, and if the rear one fires, it doesn't fire at the aircraft, you've got to fire in front of it, because that's where the aeroplane will be when the bullets get there. a little bit like gravity dropping a bullet if you're shooting straight. It will actually fall over a distance, so you need to allow for that.
Thank you. Jeff Ross from the RAAF Museum at the Aero RSL. With names like Mirage and Vulcan and Sabre and Mustang and Spitfire, did Camel and Pup have any psychological effect on the enemy?
That I'm not too sure. I've not gone through that background of the names. I do know that the Pup was a nickname given to the aircraft. Initially it was called the Scout. How the Pup was derived is a little bit of folklore perhaps, but some said it was the little brother of the 1.5 Strutter. That was the other preferred Sopwith aircraft at the time. But how the run of aircraft go, I don't know. And on modern days, nowadays, the Bell aircraft are all named after the Native American tribes, etc. like that. Someone from the floor may have more information than I am aware of.
Yes, Bob Woolley from the Sonoma RSL. It's my understanding that the DR1 was actually basically a copy of the Sopwith triplane. Have you any idea how that compared in performance?
No, I've not researched the Sopwith triplane, but yes, you are correct. Because of the time, the Sopwith triplane had entered the Western Front, and Fokker were playing catch up onto the development of aeroplanes. As it said, the triplane started out as a prototype biplane. And then the Sopwith triplane was on the Western Front, so they stuck another set of wings on to become the Fokker triplane. And that was happening so fast in the development of aeroplanes in those days, much more quickly perhaps than what was in the Second World War. Question over in the front there.
Natalie, I work at the museum as a volunteer station officer. I read a story not long ago that on Rectop saw a single triplane, Sopwith triplane, attacked by about 67 German aircraft, and he managed to shoot some of them down and evade the rest and escape because they all ran out of ammunition. Watching on the ground was on Rectop, and he said, I want one of those, and that's how you got the triplane.
That could probably be, well, especially a man of his standing at the time, he could probably do that thing, and the hierarchy would oblige him.
Stephen Drew, just in response to the last gentleman's comment, the fighter in question at that time, flying that aircraft, who willingly went into combat with 11 of Richthofen's hand-picked pilots, willingly went into combat alone against them, and it was against 11. The pilot was Australian Robert Alexander Little. He outflew the 11 Albatross of Richthofen's service, diving and circling around them, shooting down, I believe, 2 in the engagement, and just completely outclassed them, and then drew them into the flak guns and dived away. And there's a very interesting report from the commander of that anti-aircraft battery. And yes, indeed, that's believed to be the reason why Richthofen spoke to Fokker about producing the triplane.
Thank you.
Last question.
Thank you. In my paper this morning, I alluded to some of the problems with the AFC training squadrons. Namely, there was a shortage of cannon pilots in 1918. And this appears to be because the casualty rates in the number squadron in number 4 squadron were much higher than those in number 2 squadron, which was flying SE-5As. The training squadrons appear to have been training numbers, I think 5 and 8 were training counterparts on rotor engine scouts, and number 6 training squadron was training inline engine scouts for the SE-5A. Would the training have been much different? I mean, my thought when I sort of read about the shortages was why not get some of the SE-5 pilots and give them, a quick zip around the airfield in an SE-5A and show them how it's done. I mean, would there have been more in it than that to make the transition from rotary to inline?
I don't imagine it would have been the actual transition from a rotary to inline. A lot of it would have been with the personal experiences of the instructors. Don't forget we're talking about single-seat aeroplanes. So it's pretty hard to instruct a pilot on where he's going wrong if really you're not there with him. All you can do is put it on the blackboard perhaps and talk about it. And obviously the outcome is whether they survived or not, how good they were instructed. So a lot of that instruction, unlike today, where we sit either beside or behind the student and we can observe and then correct or guide or mentor, that wasn't available in those days. So I think it was probably just a statistical anomaly, I would imagine.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's say thank you, Darcy. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've got afternoon tea. I think you'll agree after looking at the magnificent aircraft in this museum over lunch, and then hearing those two presentations on ACES and actually flying the aircraft, we've had a good session, and now it's time for a cup of tea. Please be back here by 3:28. 3:25. 3:25.
Oh, you're hard, man. Well, look, just we're here. We're 7 minutes ahead. Yes.